And welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Let's see where we are here. Let's try this. So I am going to say at this point that there's some really challenging stuff happening here. It's challenging both in terms of understanding it, but it's perhaps even more challenging to the extent that we do understand it, and it possibly confronts our own sensibilities, etc. So, having said that, I think it is terribly important to understand and to keep an open mind, as we've had to do at other times as well, to know that this material is this in this particular parsha is a subject of major Talmudic discussion. And so that just understanding it on this very superficial level and then making judgments on it based on our own values, etc., I think is a mistake. And but on the other hand, it's still challenging. And so you'll see, of course, they're going to be dealing with slavery and stuff like that, stuff that we don't even hold with anymore. At least we don't. Sadly, slavery still does exist in this world. It's a scourge. I think it's a terrible thing. I think the Torah, and certainly in rabbinic literature, there's a move away from it, not to the extent that we would like, at least that I would like, I suspect all of us would like, but nevertheless, it's dealing with it. And it's trying to deal with it, at least within that context, I suppose, as compassionately and as progressively as possible. So we'll go in here. So last time we met, we had to stop in the middle of this Rashi. That's why this mark is right here in the middle of a Rashi. And it talks about a situation. Here's the verse: V'chi rivun anashim, when two people are striving against each other, they're quarreling. V'hika ish et re'ehu, and a man strikes his neighbor, be'evan or be'egrof, with a stone or with his fist. V'lo yamud, but the person doesn't die. It's not a mortal blow. V'nafal lemishkav, and he literally it means he is incapacitated. Literally, he fell to lie down. That's what it means, literally. But if you look at the Aramaic translation, it means he can no longer do his work. He's injured to a point where he can no longer work. And there are several categories that involving compensation that the Torah is going to discuss. So I'm not going to go back over the Rashi. You can take a look at the lesson from last year, but we're going to go on. V'nafal lemishkav, right? This is he's incapacitated, but literally it means he had to go to bed. He lay on his bed, and so Rashi says ketargumor. It follows the meaning of this follows the Targum's translation, which isn't a literal translation. And this is I think it's vayapel. I'm going to guess. I'll have to go back and look at the vowels. Vayipel. My Aramaic grammar is not perfect by any means. Vayipel levutlan. So he says, lecholi shemevatlo mimelachto. This is Rashi now. To a level of illness, right, which prevents him from his labor, from his work. So, im yakum vehit alech bachutz. If he arises and he can go outside, literally, and he can walk outside, if we wanted to say that, or go outside. Al mishanto, literally it means on his staff, but you'll see that that is not the way we understand that. The nikah hamake, the assailant will be cleared. Nikah, cleaned, literally. Hamake, the one who strikes him. Rak shivto yibte, but he should give him, literally it means the Shabbat, right? Cease from labor. In other words, his time that he couldn't work, he has to compensate him for his time off work. V'rafo yirapeh, and he shall surely be healed. So again, we're going to try to understand this. Al mishanto. So literally it means on his staff, but this is not how we understand it. We understand it as an idiom, and it means al v'kocho, which means he's fully healed. He returns to his original strength. Bari is the Hebrew word for health, right? And his strength. And this is the Mechilta. This is a very early interpretation of these verses. V'nakeh hamakeh, all right, or v'nikah hamakeh. It means okay, so it means the assailant, the one who strikes him, will be cleared. So Rashi says, v'chi ta'aleh al darcha, would you, in other words, he's questioning, why is this even being said? Why would we question as to whether or not the man is cleared? Because clearly the implication is if he doesn't die, right? And it says the assailant will be cleared. V'chi ta'aleh al darcha sheyehareg zeh. Would it even occur to you that the assailant should be killed? In other words, face a capital punishment. Shelo harag, since he never killed him. Ela lelamedcha kan. But what this verse comes to teach you here it's an interesting statement. Shechovshin oto, that they actually put him, they incarcerate him. They incarcerate the one who struck him, ad shenireh im yitrapeh, until they see that this individual is fully healed. So presumably this man is struck him so hard that he may be lying unconscious, and the assailant then is put in prison until it's clarified as to whether or not he committed murder. V'chein mashma'o, and this is the implication, keshekam ze v'holech al mishanto, of the whole point of saying when he arises and goes al mishanto on his staff, but we understand meaning when he is fully recovered, when he's returned to health. In other words, it's clear that he is not going to die. That's the point, right? Az nikah hamakeh. At that point, the assailant is cleared.
But
1 second, can I just finish the sentence, please? Just a little bit more. Hold your thought, please. Aval ad shelo yakum zeh. But until the one who's been struck doesn't get up, lo nikah hamakeh. At that point, we cannot say that the assailant is cleared. Yes, go ahead, Lauren.
there's a lot of room for things happening in between his dying and his being able to get up and get back into action. I mean, he may remain in a coma, or he may remain bedridden and not be able to ever get back to work, but still be alive. So I'm not sure I understand exactly what's happening.
The issue here is this considered murder? Is this person punishable by death? And what do we do until that point? Okay. So if I realize that it's possible that when it says he's fully restored to health, that the person is totally cleared. And it's possible, again, this is why I'm saying you're raising issues that clearly have to be clarified, okay? They aren't necessarily clarified here, but let's finish the sentence and see if it helps clear it up a little bit more so that I'm not guessing too much, right? And that's the rest of the sentence. So the situation, let's say, is that the person, the man who's been struck is lying in bed. He could be in a coma, etc., etc. But it says rak shifto. The issue is the assailant considered having committed a capital offense? And the answer is, the Torah is clarifying, no, it's not a capital offense, rak shifto. But this is, remember, his labor, the fact that his loss of labor, bitul melachto, meaning his inability to do his work, mechamat hacholi, on account of his illness. So he gives some specific examples. In kata yado, if this person struck him so that he chopped off his hand, or raglu, or his leg, or in bitul melachto, in that particular case, is he capable of any labor whatsoever? And the answer is he is capable of some kind of labor. They see his loss of labor as mechamat choli, on account of his illness. In other words, you have to take into account what is the nature of his injury, if at this point he is basically healthy, ki ilu hu shomer kishuim, as if he is now relegated to someone who is guarding squash, okay, guarding vegetables, which of
It
course,
says here cucumber.
okay, so they're translating kishuin as cucumbers, and that's fine. It was some kind of squash, right? But I'll put in cucumbers.
I don't know.
And no, it's okay. The issue is that it's a vegetable. He's guarding a vegetable garden. Ask yourself, what level of labor is that considered? Shahare afla achar hacholi, because even after he was ill, enor ra'ui lemelechet yad, he is no longer capable of doing any labor with his hands or his legs. V'hu kvar nitan lo, and on the other hand, we're not going to compensate him beyond that. It says he has already, the one who's guilty has already compensated him mechamat nisko, on account of the actual injury. So we had read that earlier on, deme yado, the amount of money for his hand, for the loss of his hand, veraglo, or the loss of his leg. He's had to pay him for that already, okay, which would involve pain and suffering. Okay, he's had to pay him, compensate him for pain and suffering. Because what it stated in the text was a hand under a hand, or a hand for a hand, regel tachat regel, a leg for a leg, or a foot for a foot. And we read that before last year. We did that in the previous lesson. So they're trying to clarify here what's involved. So if the person's comatose, right, again, he is going to have to continue to pay for his medical expenses, right? The person who put him in that condition has to pay and compensate him for his medical expenses as long as he's under a coma, or in the hospital. He has to continue to pay for all of that, right? And he has to pay for the fact that he's no longer employable in the way that he was. And that's going to be as long as he's going to be there. Now, the question that's remaining was that issue about whether or not he is the person, the guilty one, is actually incarcerated and is continued to be incarcerated. And that would have to be clarified. I could guess that as long as this person isn't in danger of expiring in any, in any point soon, the man could be released, because he's going to have to find a way in which to compensate him for this. Okay. This has to do with the medical expenses, and Rashi's going to say that. It means he shall surely be healed. And he says, just as the Targum states, Yishalem schar harofeh, he has to pay the wages of the doctor. So again, I happen to feel this is actually quite progressive. There were places where, and there might even be places today, where someone who commits this kind of thing, and depending on the person whom he's doing it against, might well be killed. I mean, when I consider that there was some report some years ago, I think this was in North Korea, of some soldier who was standing and fell asleep during a speech of I don't know, it was Kim Il-jung or whoever, and was basically sentenced to death. So, when people have tremendous power, how How responsible are they? And here's the Torah saying no one has a right to do these kinds of things. So, going on. This is where it gets a little bit more difficult, I would say, right? If a man strikes his slave, or et hamato, or his maidservant bashevet, with a rod, umet tachat yado, and this, as a result, the slave is killed. Nakom yinakem. It means he will be avenged, meaning, of course, that's a capital offense. That's considered murder. And that, again, in a sense, is progressive. Because even though this person has the status of his slave, meaning that he's his property or she's his property, that doesn't give him the right to do that. So let's take a look, make sure I'm telling you correctly. So the Torah, the statement that we have here simply is, if a man strikes his slave or his maid slave, and he says, Be'evet hakna'ani hakutuv medaber. He says we have to understand that here the Torah is talking about what is determined as a Canaanite slave. Right? In other words, this law does not apply to an Israelite slave. And where this law is going, we still have to see. Right? So then it says, O eno ele be'ivri. He says, well, wait a second, how do we know that? Maybe it is a reductio ad absurdum. Maybe it is talking about a Hebrew slave. Talmud lomar, for this reason, scripture says, ki kaspohu. It goes on, the rest of this, in the next verse, it says, here, ki kaspohu. He is his money, something like that, right? He's his property, right? And the point about it is, I'll just take the Rashi, ma kaspoy kanui lo olamit. And just as his money is acquired to him forever, in other words, as long as you've acquired this money in a legitimate kind of way, no one has a right to take it away from you. It is your permanent property. Af eved kakanui lo olamit. So it must be talking about the context of a slave who is his property forever. V'harei haya b'chal. So, before I go on any more, we know about Hebrew servants, that they aren't, even Hebrew slaves, basically, remember, went free in the 7th year, right? And that was a Hebrew slave that was sold by a court to pay his damages, in order to pay his damages, and had to be released in the 7th year. We also know about slaves, and I'd have to say, quote, okay, that were Hebrew slaves that became slaves on account of destitution or something like that. And again, we know that they are still fully considered Hebrews, Israelites, and have those. But there is another statement elsewhere which talks about Canaanite slaves, and they do not go free. They are considered the person's property. So we are saying that this particular verse applies only to what we're calling Canaanite slaves. So, v'harei haya bichlal makeh ish v'meit. And even this Canaanite slave would be under the law, the general law of saying, if a man strikes another man, one who strikes a man so that he dies, right? In other words, if somebody kills someone else, Canaanite slaves included in that. In other words, if this person's master killed him, that's the nakom yinakem, right? He is going to be guilty of a capital offense. Elabaha katuv, but this particular verse is coming, the hotzio min haklal, is taking it out of that general rule. In other words, it's creating one exception to that rule. Liot nidon bedin yom or yomayim, to say, and we're going to see this in the text itself, he's anticipating this text, that there's this issue of if he doesn't strike him and kill him, if he doesn't kill him in that act, and I'll just keep going. I'll leave it as a little bit of a question. He's going to go explain. She'im lo meit tachat yado. That is to say that if he doesn't kill him actively, if he doesn't actively kill this individual, so he's striking him and he dies. That's what we're talking about. V'sha'ah me'et la'et. But he actually survives. This Canaanite slave survives for 24 hours. This is me'et la'et. Patur, he is no longer considered being guilty of a capital offense. And we have to understand that according to Torah law, if you kill someone else, your life now becomes forfeit. And what he's saying is that the owner's life is no longer forfeit. Does that mean he gets off without any punishment whatsoever? No, doesn't mean that. It just means he's not held guilty for a capital offense. Whereas with anyone else, in other words, if he strikes someone else, whether the person is a Hebrew or not a Hebrew, as long as that person isn't a slave, a non-Hebrew slave or a Canaanite slave, and he survives a few days but then dies, the person who struck him is still guilty of a capital offense. So it's this one small exception that says if he doesn't kill him instantaneously, okay, and he survives past 24 hours. Beshevet, so with a rod, kesheyesh bo kedei lahamit hakatuv medaber. He's saying what it's saying is he struck him with an object, okay, in a way that can kill a person. He has to be using something. In other words, it has to be, the intention has to be to kill this person, to kill his slave. Or eino ela afilu ein bo kedei lahamit. Or does this also apply to a situation if he's striking him in a way that he isn't using an object that is capable of killing a person? Talmud Lomar Yisrael, we learn elsewhere regarding an Israelite, and he says in Numbers chapter 35, Ve'im be'even yad, okay, that there it's talking about, because in that particular chapter, it's talking about the difference between murder and manslaughter, okay? And so here it's saying, Ve'im be'even yad, that if this person attacks him with a stone in his hand, right? Asher yamut ba. And it goes on, that verse goes on to say, with which a person can be killed, capable of killing a person. It actually goes on to say, or bechli eitz, or with something made out of wood, okay, asher yamut bo, with which a person can be killed. This is a parenthetical statement saying that this, I think it's Avraham Mizrahi, that the aim is that his version of Rashi had this as well. Okay, he kahu, in other words, he struck him with something that is capable of killing a person. So that's a consideration there. So if a person attacks another person, a Jew attacks another person, and doesn't have anything, it just happens that the person dies, not because the person who attacked him had something in his hand or whatever to kill him, okay? That is a consideration regarding it becomes manslaughter, because the fact that he didn't have something, that he wasn't capable of killing him at the point when he attacked him, it's not considered murder. So going on, because we have that particular case regarding a Jew striking another Jew, v'halod varim kal v'chomer, we could in fact deduce that if that's the case regarding an Israelite, Uma Yisrael chamur, the case of an Israelite is considered a more serious case, right, or a heavier case. Ein chayav alav. In such a case, since he didn't use an instrument of death, right, the man who attacked him is not considered guilty of a capital offense. Remember, he's still guilty, but just not of a capital offense. Ela im ken hikahu b'davar sheyesh bo kedei lahamit, only if he had attacked him with something capable of killing him. Va'al ever shehu kedei lamut, or he has to, I think this is saying, so for example, your fist is capable of killing someone. In other words, or he had to be, even if he didn't have some instrument in his hand, but he killed him with a limb, which is, or it's talking about a limb which would kill him. In other words, that when he attacked him, he aimed at a limb that was capable of killing him, right? So if he strangled him, for example, behaka'azo avad, okay, so sorry, behaka'azo, with this particular striking, eved hakal, in a case of a slave, which isn't considered as serious a case, lo kol shekain, would this not be the case? In other words, just to summarize what we're saying is that if in a case between, let's say, two Israelites, there's a necessity of that intent to kill and that capability of killing in the act itself, right? So, for example, if he smacked him on the leg, right, and somehow this person died, that isn't considered murder. On the other hand, if he strangled him, that's murder. And this is between two Israelites. And this is a case we're talking about now with this Canaanite slave. So if that person is not considered a murderer in the case regarding two Israelites, then he certainly is not going to be considered a murderer in this case. Nakom Yanakem, he shall certainly be avenged. And he says this particular expression is, according to Sanhedrin, the tractate Sanhedrin, mitat sayef. We're talking essentially about decapitation, right? There are four ways in which a capital offense, a capital situation could be, in fact, administered. V'chein hu omer. So he gives an example. It states, cherev nokemet, the avenging sword, nokem brit, avenging the covenant, right? So it talks about a sword. So essentially, they were talking about this kind of way in which a person was executed, as opposed to strangulation or other kinds of ways. So we are going to stop here. We do need to, this next verse is the part that talks about if he survives for 24 hours. And I'm going to put in the marking here. And I do want to give you an opportunity to question or comment before I stop the recording.
Oh, I don't like that because it's when it's saying that, if he has some leniency in the case with a Hebrew slave, then how much more so with this Canaanite? And it's basically saying that these various creatures of God have different values to the fact that they were born, to the fact that they are people and creatures. And we in an earlier Rashi, we kind of dug into the fact that they were both human. And if they're so fully both human and God's creatures, why, I understand the value of their humanity can seem like it's determined by their status as a slave or a not slave, or as an Israelite or a not Israelite, and on a certain level, but only on a certain practical level, not on a value, an actual value of life level.
This is exactly why I'm saying we have to hold judgment, right? You're right. I mean, I don't blame you for bristling. But there's a lot more to be said in terms of trying to understand to what extent is this a fair and just system? I think they're speaking from this isn't going to help a lot, but my sense, and I'm not saying that I totally understand it. I don't feel I do. I've never studied in depth, and the depth is deep, right? All the material that surrounds this material. The best way I can handle it is to say that it is trying to protect the rights of the perpetrator. That it's saying, even though it would be easy to just write off the perpetrator and say, he did this, so consequently he has to be executed. And it's saying, no, even the perpetrator has to have some level of rights built in to protect it. And I think there's an awareness, because you yourself are aware of how many people were executed who turned out to be innocent.
That's why I'm against execute. One of the reasons I'm against execution.
Of course.
Remember, this guy says these people are slaves. They're not free. I assume it's different when it's a free person of whatever from wherever that you go and you kill them. But isn't there intent involved also?
Very much.
Sometimes, is it oops, overdid it, or I really want to kill you because you're driving me nuts?
Well, again, there's all these particular factors. It's a very complicated issue, and the stakes are very high when you're talking about executing someone. Now, we could get into the whole, at least what I'm seeing here is an attempt to not just have wholesale executions, okay? And to make sure that even the guilty party has some built-in rights. Now that's the issue, and that's the argument that Rashi is saying here. So on the one hand, we're trying to balance a whole bunch of issues, two different sides here. One is the fact that the slave is in fact a human being, created in the image of God. Yes, that's true. And that's why, there are those people who would have said, well, a slave owner who kills his slave, well, it's his property, big deal. He loses the ability to have this person work for them. He has that right. And this isn't saying that. It is not saying that. But on the other hand, it's also saying that there are certain limitations on that too. Again, I can't justify slavery in any way, but I'm living in a society that, at least by and large, understands that. But
nor can you just
okay, that's a different story.
But nor can you justify that if somebody's injuries don't kill them instantaneously, but it takes them 24 hours and 1 minute of surviving pain before he dies, that's not murder. That's not justifiable to me.
But again, it wouldn't be justified if you work away free, okay? He still has to take care of this person. We already read about another case where he has to pay for his medical expenses. He has to pay for the fact that he no longer has any source of income.
I'm talking about if the guy dies, but he dies after 24 hours.
Right, I understand. He still has to, but again, the man has a family. Who knows, right? And again, we don't know what kind of punishments we might say that this individual has. We just don't know right now because we don't have that information.
The way I look at it, if murder is a capital offense, to me this doesn't seem like it should be exempt from murder. He clearly died because he was struck. He wasn't on his deathbed. He suffered from injuries that took him, a day's worth of suffering before he died.
But again, I think they're trying to say that had the person intended to kill him, he would have killed him right away. Okay, and so I think
that's not proof.
Well, they're just trying to skirt that manslaughter versus murder thing.
Yeah,
I agree.
Lauren, it's again trying to find a way to not have to kill someone. Okay, and again, you can see it as an attempt to try and avoid capital punishment and find some reason not to do it. I'm going to stop the recording here.